September 5th, 1944. 18:20 hours. Haarlem, Nazi-occupied Netherlands. The late summer air smells of damp brick and coal smoke from a Wehrmacht field kitchen. Church bells echo somewhere beyond blackout curtains mandated by the Luftwaffe. On a narrow street lined with bicycles and boarded windows, a 14-year-old Dutch girl pedals slowly against the evening traffic of German Kabelwagens. Her name is Freddie Oversteegen. She is small, blonde, laughing. In the pocket of her dress is a loaded M1911 pistol, supplied by the Dutch resistance through an OSS network. In the next 10 minutes, an Oberleutnant of the Feldgendarmerie will follow her into the woods. He will never come back. This is not a story about battlefield heroism on the Western Front. It is not a story of GIs, Shermans, or front lines. It is a story of deception weaponized behind enemy lines. It is about innocence turned into camouflage. It is about how occupation armies lose wars not only to bullets, but to girls they refuse to see. Freddie Oversteegen's secret weapon was not strength, it was perception. She understood something the Wehrmacht and the SS never did. The arrogance of power creates a fatal blindness. Men who believe themselves the master race are already defeated. The German blitzkrieg invasion of the Netherlands in May 1940, Fall Gelb, lasted just 5 days. Rotterdam burned under a Luftwaffe terror bombing. The Dutch army collapsed. Queen Wilhelmina fled to London to establish a government in exile. The Nazi occupation arrived quietly. It was a Gleichschaltung, a forced coordination of everyday life. There were no mass executions at first, just regulations, ration cards, curfews. Then, the disappearances began. Jews vanished, first to the transit camp at Westerbork, then east. Teachers stopped coming to work. Neighbors lowered their voices. Fear became routine. Freddie was 13. She lived near Haarlem with her mother and older sister Truus. They were poor, politically aware, and already dangerous in ways that did not appear on paper. Their mother hid Jewish refugees from the Sicherheitsdienst long before it was illegal. She continued after it became a death sentence. By 1941, the family was already on the radar of local NSB collaborators, the Dutch Nazi Party. One evening, a man from the Raad van Verzet, the Council of Resistance, knocked on their door. He wore no uniform. He did not raise his voice. He asked one question: would your daughters be willing to help the Allied cause? Not fight on the front, not kill in the open. Help. Freddie listened from the doorway. She raised her hand before her sister did. The Dutch resistance understood a basic truth of occupation warfare. A man on a bicycle was suspicious. A woman was less so. A teenage girl was invisible. German authority rested on a single fatal assumption. Children, especially girls, were harmless. Freddie Oversteegen would turn that Aryan fantasy into a weapon. Her training was brief. It was akin to the fieldcraft taught to Allied operatives before being dropped into France. There were no drills, no ranks, no speeches. She was taught how to listen for the difference between a regular army lancer and a Gestapo man. She was taught how to let silence do the work. She learned how to laugh without flirting. She learned how to let a man talk himself into a trap. She memorized streets and alleyways, tree lines and footpaths like an intelligence officer studying a map. She learned to ride her bicycle with one hand, because the other might be holding a gun. German officers were forbidden to fraternize with suspected resistance members. They were encouraged to relax, to feel safe in the Reichskommissariat Niederlande. A smiling girl on a bicycle did not trigger the alarms reserved for partisans. She triggered ego. Freddie understood the psychology immediately. She did not present herself as bold. She presented herself as harmless, curious, young, just old enough to interest men who believed themselves untouchable conquerors. Haarlem, 1943. An Oberleutnant leaves a calf just after dusk. Freddie passes him on her bicycle. She slows. She smiles. She lets the silence stretch. He speaks first. She does not flirt like a woman. She flirts like a child pretending to be older. The officer relaxes. He offers her chocolate, a prized commodity. She accepts. She tells him she knows a quiet place away from the Feldgendarmerie patrols. The woods are close. He follows. What he does not know is that the meeting has already been planned by her resistance cell. Sometimes Truist waits in the trees. Sometimes another fighter from their group. Sometimes it is only Freddie. The gunshot is close, deliberate. A single suppressed sound lost in the rustle of leaves. The officer collapses. Freddie wipes the pistol clean, a procedure she had been taught. She gets back on her bicycle. She pedals home in time for the evening curfew. This is not a single act. It becomes a method, a silent campaign of attrition against the German command structure. Officers begin disappearing without witnesses. Their fate is listed as missing or deserted. No bodies found in streets, no alarms triggered. Just absences that fray morale. Resistance records remain vague. Post-war Allied intelligence estimates suggest scores of German personnel were eliminated this way. Freddie never kept count. She later said they did not see them as men. They saw them as uniforms, as the embodiment of the occupation. She was still a child. She still went to school. She still laughed with friends. She still pedaled through the same streets she hunted in. She learned to separate fear from function. Fear caused hesitation. Hesitation got entire safe houses raided by the Sicherheitsdienst. She saw collaborators executed by the resistance in the street. She saw the trains to Auschwitz roll anyway. The war did not slow down for moral clarity. As the Allied front tightened after D-Day, the nature of the target changed. Senior staff officers, SS personnel, and Gestapo officials no longer strolled alone. They moved in armored cars or sturdy Mercedes staff cars. This required a different kind of violence. One that was silent, untraceable. That looked like a terrible, mundane accident. Freddie's mind, already honed for lethal opportunities, began to tinker with the problem. She found the solution not in an OSS sabotage manual, but in her own backyard. She was fixing her bicycle, a heavy black Fongers model. The brake cable was a sturdy, flexible steel wire. As she pulled it, she watched it slice easily through a rotten apple on the ground. The idea arrived not as a lightning bolt, but as a quiet, cold certainty. The workshop was the garden shed. Her tools were pilfered. Her father's wire cutters, a spool of thin, strong copper wire salvaged from a ruined Philips radio. A file. She worked at night under a blackout curtain. The principle was brutally simple. A short, strong strand of wire, each end fashioned into a small, sharp hook. One hook anchored to the chassis of a car, near the driver's side door. The other end laid carefully across the top of the front tire. When the car moved forward, the tire would spin, pulling the wire taut and whipping it back at unimaginable speed directly through the open window. A horizontal, invisible guillotine for anyone in the passenger seat. She tested it. The copper wire, pulled by her bicycle wheel, sliced clean through a rotten fence post. The first field test was on an SS Hauptsturmfuhrer in Haltert. At 0645, under a gray dawn, Freddie pedaled slowly down the lane, a loaf of black market bread in her basket. She pretended to adjust her brake near the officer's black Horch sedan. Her movements were slow, deliberate. The movements of a child fumbling with a chain. In 5 seconds, it was done. She watched from a doorway. The officer slid into the car. The engine turned over. The car pulled forward. There was no explosion, just the normal crunch of gravel. The car rolled 5 feet. Then, a sound like a sudden sharp slap of wet canvas. The Horch jerked to a stop. The driver stumbled out, screaming. There was no movement from the rear seat. Freddie mounted her bicycle and pedaled away. Not fast, not frantic. Just a girl late for her chores. Her weapon was gone, vanished, likely tangled in the wheel well. Just a tragic, inexplicable accident in a war full of them. The method was refined. The engineering improved. Copper wire was abandoned for finer, stronger piano wire, almost impossible to see. She used it on the motorcycles of Krajcen couriers and junior officers. The results were horrifically consistent. A senior Gestapo officer in Antwerp found slumped in his Opel with a thin laceration across his neck, blamed on a stray wire from a bombed-out factory. A Wehrmacht convoy commander near Ghent, killed on his BMW motorcycle. The German response was confusion, then paranoia. Security bulletins from the Ortskommandantur warned of partisan wire traps, but they were looking for Allied plastic explosives, for cut fuel lines. They never found the cause. How could they? The evidence was a thin strand of metal indistinguishable from the detritus of a continent at war. The killer was a ghost. The murder weapon was a fragment of nothing. Late 1944, during the tense stalemate after Operation Market Garden, a German patrol from a Feldersatz battalion stops her. They search her bicycle. A mimeographed Allied propaganda leaflet, dropped by the RAF, is found in her saddlebag. The Feldwebel looks at her braids, her dirty knees. He laughs, a harsh, condescending sound. He tears the paper in half and lets her go. Freddie pedals away shaking, not from the close call, but from the sheer blinding arrogance of it. This was the ultimate danger and power of her deception. It only worked if the enemy remained utterly convinced of their own myth of superiority. April 1945. Tanks of the Canadian First Army, part of Montgomery's 21st Army Group, enter Harlem. The occupation ends not with celebration, but with a numb exhaustion. Freddie is 16. She has been conducting a personal war of assassination for 2 years. The resistance dissolves. Sten guns and pistols are buried. Girls are told to be girls again. There are no medals from Eisenhower's headquarters. No parades. The official Allied military government reports state that valuable civilian assistance was rendered. What the after-action reports and unit diaries do not show is how many Wehrmacht and SS personnel followed a laughing girl into the woods and never returned. They do not log the silent slicing wire that turned a staff car into a sealed coffin. Freddie Oversteegen rarely spoke about the war. Neither did Truus. They married. They worked ordinary jobs. For decades, the Netherlands and the wider Allied nations struggled with how to remember girls who killed. Recognition came late, in the 1980s. When Freddie was finally awarded a medal, she accepted it quietly. She said only what so many veterans of that hidden war said. They did what had to be done. The Nazi occupation collapsed not just because of Patton's Third Army and Montgomery's push, but because of fatal assumptions. That the Volk were weak. That youth was irrelevant. That terror only ran one direction. Freddie Oversteegen proved a timeless truth of asymmetric warfare. A lesson later studied by special forces from the SAS to the Green Berets. The most dangerous weapon is the one the enemy's ideology prevents them from seeing. She did not storm the Siegfried Line. She did not command a company of GIs. She rode a bicycle. She smiled. From 1943 to 1945, she helped dismantle the Nazi illusion of control, one officer at a time, with a whispered invitation or a strand of unseen wire. History's grand narratives are written about generals and campaigns. Occupations are undone by ghosts in the shadows. Sometimes those ghosts are 14 years old, pedaling home before curfew. The end of the war did not erase the habits forged in silence. For years afterward, Freddie noticed exits before entrances, shadows before faces, pauses before words. Ordinary life demanded a kind of courage she had never been trained for, the courage to be seen without a disguise. She learned it slowly, like everything else, one day at a time. The Netherlands rebuilt itself brick by brick, canal by canal. Memorials rose to honor resistance fighters. Many names remained unspoken. The work of invisible war does not lend itself easily to statues. How do you carve absence into stone? How do you commemorate a smile that killed? Historians later debated the ethics of assassination, of child combatants, of deception as doctrine. The debates came from distance and safety. In occupied Harlem, morality had been compressed into minutes and meters. Choices were made quickly, or not at all. Freddie never claimed heroism. She claimed necessity. In military academies decades later, instructors spoke of Freddie Oversteegen without naming her at first. They described the principles: exploit enemy assumptions, weaponize invisibility, let ideology become a weakness. Only afterward did they reveal that the architect of those lessons was a teenage girl with a bicycle and a wire. Her story endures not because of the number of lives she took, but because of the illusion she shattered. Power, she proved, is fragile when it refuses to see. Armies fall when they mistake dominance for awareness. Empires collapse when they dismiss the quiet figures at their edges. Freddie Oversteegen lived long enough to see the world change again, to see new wars fought with new technologies, but the old lesson remained. Somewhere in every conflict there is someone being overlooked, someone dismissed, someone underestimated. And that is where occupations begin to fail.